on YouTube and podcasts, they always talk about like making sure to say like and subscribe and rate us on Apple and stuff like that, and we never do it. So I always wonder if maybe we should.
No, maybe we should do that.
Try to do that.
Yeah.
Will you just add that bit in yourself, Josh? The like and subscribe and rate our podcast. So we will definitely read out your review on the show.
Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Pomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and human evolution.
And I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, paleogeneticist, looking mostly at extinct cats.
And today we are talking about the movie Night at the Museum from 2006. Had you, Ross, you'd seen this before because you said you had it on DVD?
Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times actually. I think I first saw it on an airplane, but yeah, watched it at home with the kids as well.
Yeah, me too. Well, not with the kids.
I think I'd seen this before, but it was a little bit forgettable, I guess, because when I watched it this time, I couldn't remember whether or not I had seen it.
Oh, wow.
Who wants to summarize this one?
I can, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't mind. Do you want to do it, Kim?
No, you can do it.
Okay. Well, so what happens at night at the museum? Well, it kind of starts with Ben Stiller's character, who is painted as a bit of a loser, doesn't have a job, he's divorced, he sees his kid every so often, but his kid seems to really like him, but is not super proud of him because he's not possibly achieved very much career-wise, and his ex-wife and his son's mother is now living with Paul Rudd, who, against kind of type, is kind of cast as a bit of an arsehole in this, even though he doesn't do... I mean, it's impossible for Paul Rudd to come across as an arsehole, but he kind of seems to be a bit kind of condescending to Ben Stiller. Anyway, and we discover that while Ben Stiller is kind of running from job interview to job interview, he's also kind of facing eviction from his flat, and that's a big problem because it's going to interfere with the routine of his son coming to visit, and it's just everything seems to be falling apart. So he goes to the employment agency and kind of is basically begging them, desperate for a job, and they sort of send him to the museum, which I think is the Smithsonian, but I could be wrong.
No, American Museum of Natural History.
Okay, so not the Smithsonian, the American Museum of Natural History. In New York.
Smithsonian is in Washington. Yeah.
Okay.
Washington, D.C.
The American Museum of Natural History in New York, where he is being interviewed for the job of a night guardsman by the day guards, who are Dick Van Dyke, Mickey Rooney, and Billy Cobb, I think was his name, the third one. I can't quite remember. But basically,
Cobbs.
Very, very familiar faces for anyone who's watched movies any time in the past 60 years. And so they're all kind of pretty ancient, but they're all pretty spry, and they're quite keen to take on Ben Stiller as the night guardsman. But you kind of get the impression that they have ulterior motives, that not everything is exactly as it seems. Dick Van Dyke is the kind of ringleader. He kind of shows Ben Stiller around the museum. Ben Stiller seems quite happy with what's going on. He meets the head of the museum, who's played by Ricky Gervais, who pretty much I can't stand in anything, particularly in this. He just plays a complete,
I hate him. Ugh.
Dickhead. And he also meets Carla Gugino, who is a tour guide. I think docent is her official title. Someone that works as a volunteer at the museum and loves being at the museum. So anyway, he is happy to tell his son he's got a job in the museum, and he turns up for his first night shift, at which point he gets handed the keys and a big list of instructions, like a written out sheets of paper, and is told by Dick Van Dyke that he needs to go through it one by one, and as long as he does that, everything will be okay, which is also slightly unusual because you don't usually need a phone book-sized stack of paper to do a night guardsman job. And the night guards disappear, and Ben Stiller kind of gets to work with his flashlight and his key set. And he just wanders around. And you notice at the beginning that he sort of starts in the reception area where there's a big T-Rex skeleton, and he goes off and has a wander around the museum. Then he comes back to the reception area, and the T-Rex skeleton has disappeared. Like some kind of David Copperfield trick. And he thinks that the old night guardsmen are playing a trick on him. But no, actually, everything in the museum comes to life at night, because in the museum's Egyptian section, there is the tomb of Akhmen-Ra and the tablet or plaque of Akhmen-Ra, which has mysterious and mystical properties that brings things back to life. And the T-Rex is one of them. So out of nowhere, the T-Rex appears. Ben Stiller is clearly shocked by this, and kind of runs away in fear from this zombie dinosaur, but reads the first item on the list that he's been given by Dick Van Dyke, which says, throw the bone. And so he realizes that these instructions are actually going to be useful. They're for how to deal with these magical museum exhibits. And so he has to throw a rib bone for the T-Rex, which just wants to play catch and fetch. So that's fine. Number 2 on the list, I think, is to make sure and lock up the lions in the Africa diorama, because otherwise they'll eat you. And so he goes and does that. And the kind of the main sort of third of the story is him going around the museum, meeting all the exhibits. He meets Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea. He meets Teddy Roosevelt, played by Robin Williams, really cool character. He meets Jedediah and Octavius, who are like miniature Romans and Wild West figures from the Hall of Dioramas. He meets Dexter, the capuchin monkey, who hates him on sight and tries to steal his keys and slap his face. But he manages to survive the night. He meets Neanderthals as well. There's an exhibit of Neanderthal cave people. There's the kind of the Attila the Hun and his horde of folk as well. They all cause lots of trouble, but somehow he manages to keep it all together and survives the night by sort of following the instructions on the sheet that he's been left. But yeah, the night guardsmen turn up and they explain what's been going on the next morning. And Ben Stiller's not happy. I mean, who would be having to look after all this magical, alive museum exhibits? But I think he agrees to do it a second night just for the sake of the pay and for his son to kind of look after him. I mean, there are quite a lot. I
think it's because his son walked in to the museum and saw him getting fired or something.
That's right.
So there's the second night.
There's something in the wild overnight section. Some of the miniatures, isn't that what it is? Some of the miniatures of the ancient Romans have invaded the Wild West or something like that while they were alive at night, and that gets noted.
I think the Wild West has the Roman guy in the stocks or something.
That's it. They've got Octavius in the stocks. So Ricky Gervais basically fires Ben Stiller, but he kind of begs to get his job back. And this time he kind of does some reading and takes everything in hand. So the second night, you think it's going to be a simple case that everything goes to plan because he's done his research, but actually all of his research ends up making things worse. And so the second night is actually even worse than the first. And one of the cave people escapes, I think, on the second night. Escapes out the window thanks to Dexter stealing the keys and opening the window. And what we notice is that during daytime, or as soon as the sun rises, if they're outside of the museum, they turn to dust, which is not great. And so I think he's ready to give up after day 2 as well. But on day 3, on night 3 anyway, why does he come back? Because the night guards basically tell him to sort of stick it out. Was that why?
I think I was wrong. I think the kid walked in on after the second night when he was fired for all the fire extinguisher foam in the Neanderthal exhibit because the Neanderthals started a fire.
And then one of the Neanderthals
he just got a warning on the first night.
So he lost one of the Neanderthals too. And then what it was is Teddy Roosevelt told him, like, well, do you always run away from when things get hard? And so
Teddy Roosevelt with the words of wisdom. So then we also discovered that Carla Gugino's character, who's the tour guide, is doing a dissertation on Sacagawea, the native guide of Lewis and Clark, the only one that actually knew anything about their journey into the West. And so Ben Stiller asks the forbidden question, which is, "How's the dissertation going?" Which unrealistically, she actually responds to and doesn't just get immediately pissed off and tell him to bugger off. But yeah, so that's interesting. So Ben Stiller explains to her really badly that actually everything in the museum comes alive, and including Sacagawea, and Carla Gugino thinks that he's just making fun of her, which kind of sets back their incipient romance quite a bit. Anyway, so he comes back on the third night, ready to give it another go after Teddy Roosevelt's pep talk. And this is when things kick off, because it turns out that unbeknownst to Ben Stiller, the old night guards, they're rejuvenated by their nights at the museum and by being in proximity to the tablet of Akhmen-Ra. And so their plan is to get Ben Stiller in, steal the plaque so they can get the benefits of its kind of life-giving properties and frame him for the heist. So they kind of plant evidence in his office and steal the plaque, but they get noticed by Ben Stiller and his kid, who's come along to see what his dad does in the museum, because his dad wants to show him that everything comes alive and it's great. And so that's not great. Ben Stiller gets knocked out. They kind of chase the kid. Everything kind of goes crazy. The doors to the museum get opened, and so some of the exhibits escape, and they have to all kind of come together to make a plan to get back the plaque. Otherwise, everyone's going to turn to dust in the morning, and that would be bad. So they enlist Jedediah and Octavius, the tiny little Wild West guy played by Owen Wilson, and Octavius, the Roman played by Steve Coogan. And they while they're kind of get the Civil War dummies that are there and the Attila the Hun's horde and various other groups to try and capture all the night guards, and only one of them escapes, Dick Van Dyke. But luckily, his escape van, the Octavius and Jedediah, have deflated the tires, so he doesn't get very far. But they know this because they break Sacagawea out of her case, and she uses her tracking skills to find the van just around the corner, which is great. But then Dick Van Dyke ditches the van and flees with the plaque on what is it? A kind of Pony Express, a mail wagon, which was also an exhibit in the museum.
It was a money wagon, so horses trained to not stop. Yeah.
Yes, which is a vital plot point. So the horses are trained not to stop. Though me, as a stupid European, didn't know that. That's not part of my historical learning. But Ben Stiller jumps on a horse and chases after him, and he's gaining upon Dick Van Dyke and the wagon. When Dick Van Dyke stupidly does a kind of plot reveal and says just what Kim said, that this is a money train wagon, and the horses aren't trained to stop unless you use the special word, which is, what is the special word?
Dakota.
I thought I wrote it. That's the special word. And so the horses immediately stop, and Dick Van Dyke goes flying, and they're able to capture him and get the plaque back and put it back in the museum, and then encourage all the museum staff to come back. And I think at some point, Carla Gugino's character sees the commotion of all these escaped mammoths and cave people and all the rest of it, and comes back into the museum and sees actually Ben Stiller wasn't lying, that Sacagawea is alive, and he introduces the two of them, which is a fantastic kind of meeting point, and puts him way up in her estimation. And I think they rescue pretty much everyone by the power of teamwork and the friends that you make and all that kind of stuff. And then the next morning, obviously there's a bit of mess from the escape. Oh yes, and I've totally forgotten that they rescue Akhmen-Ra, the pharaoh whose plaque it was, who's played by Rami Malek in his one of his first roles, who had been kind of locked into his tomb, but they let him out, and he's very nice, very educated. He went to Cambridge, and he speaks Mongolian and English, which is great. And he's part of the team that brings everyone back. And then the next morning, Ben Stiller gets fired again by Ricky Gervais. But as he's stepping out into the museum, he sees that all the kind of news footage that's been displayed of mammoths and cave people and Civil War dummies on the loose at night has encouraged lots of people to come to visit the museum. They think it's like a publicity stunt, and so the museum's totally full. And Ben Stiller gets reinstated again, and it's a happy ending. I mean, that was really, really badly explained because so much actually goes on. But I think it's a really good film. It's just like the third or fourth time I've seen it, but it's still I find it really enjoyable and a fun watch. And all the characters and the cameos are great.
Yeah, the cast is really good. It's funny. There's lots of funny stuff, but this is one of these movies where I get so frustrated watching it because it creates this whole universe and then breaks all of its own rules, or the rules are so inconsistent. So we always start off with nitpicking. I want to nitpick scientific inaccuracies, but this covers so much of history and prehistory that I don't have expertise in enough of it to do that. So hopefully between us, we can do that well enough. But most of my notes have to do with how it just establishes rules and then breaks them, or just does. So for example, let's see which one I should start with here. Okay, let's talk about the languages, because there's a lot of characters from disparate times that speak non-English languages. You've already noted that the Egyptian pharaoh speaks English, and then they explain that one actually, because he asked him, how do you speak English? And he's like, I went to Cambridge, which means I think he was on display there and picked it up. So fine, we can sort of hand wave that away, but they only come alive at night. But there's nobody there at night speaking English. So does this imply that these characters are conscious and are aware during the day when people are walking around, even if they can't interact? Or does it imply that there was someone working with him at night, talking with him, even though he was clearly wrapped up and not allowed out of his sarcophagus, because that was a huge important point? So how did he actually learn English? But that's not even the most important one. After that, he suddenly speaks, he's like, I know Hunnish. No explanation for how he learned that, but the Egyptian pharaohs were between 2,500 and 4,500 years ago, and the Huns were 1,400 years ago. So they're separated by 1,000 years. How in the world would he know that language? They don't explain that. Also, a lot of characters don't speak English. Like Christopher Columbus only speaks Italian. Who else is there? There's Vikings that, according to IMDb, are actually speaking Icelandic, which are the only ones that are speaking a real language. The Hunnish language is made up. I guess the Italian was real. I don't know Italian. But Octavius, the Romans speak English with a British accent. No explanation for why they know English. But at the same time, in the dioramas, the Mayans don't speak English. So why do the Romans speak English and not the Mayans? And I think, I don't want to get too political about it, but I think it's because the Romans are Europeans, so the white Europeans are allowed to speak English and be characters, but the indigenous people are only allowed to speak their indigenous language and then get locked up and not be reasoned with, whereas the Romans and the cowboys can be reasoned with, So that frustrated me. The whole inconsistent use of language, why people know English or don't know English, or why they speak it with an English accent. There's no reason the Romans should know English if the Mayans don't,
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
No, and Sacagawea probably wouldn't have been completely fluent in it either.
Yeah. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's magic. You don't got to explain shit.
That's why I don't like shows about magic. Just no rules. It's all chaos. Gotta give me some structure.
Get around. So Teddy Roosevelt is aware that he's a dummy, and he was made in a factory.
Yes, that's another one.
But he has all of Teddy Roosevelt's memories, and has his personality and everything. That's what I find strange.
So, I mean, I guess you can say that it kind of plays into they're kind of playing into their own stereotypes, maybe. So you can have Romans playing, Romans speaking English because you have, films of Romans like Spartacus and Ben-Hur and things like that, where you have English-speaking Romans. Whereas, I don't know, maybe you have, if you're kind of coming from a filmic background, then you've got, people speaking Quechua in Apocalypto or something like that would be their explanation there. I don't know, but yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, I like that reasoning. You're working really hard on that one, so I'll give you that. Okay, here's another one, and before we try maybe move on to more scientific and historical inaccuracies, the rule is that he can't let them get outside, because if they're outside at sunrise, they turn to dust. But if they're not outside at sunrise, they all independently return to their spots and freeze. He doesn't have to put them back one at a time, right?
Yeah.
So somehow they all know to return to their spot, except for the one Neanderthal that left and somehow is like, oh no, it's sunrise. Like, did he forget any other time and someone had to put him back? Because why would he do it one time just because the window's open, you know? Mm-hmm. They all know to go back on their own, but not at this critical point in the movie.
Well, that's clearly because the tablet of Akhman-Ra has a force field around it, which encompasses the walls of the Smithsonian. And so when you're within the walls, you know to return to your place. But if you go outside the walls, then that knowledge isn't impressed upon you, and so you would turn to dust.
Until they're chasing it.
Okay, how about scientific or historical inaccuracies?
Well, the main one that bothered me was that Teddy Roosevelt, and I guess you could say that Teddy Roosevelt, wasn't a scientist, and he didn't live in a time when he probably understood evolution, but he seemed to think that Dexter the monkey was our ancestor. He made a comment to, when Ben Stiller was getting mad at him, and he was like, don't get mad at your primate cousin. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here. I'm like, well, no. And then he says at the end, too, when Ben Stiller is fighting with Dexter, and they're kind of like he's kind of getting down to his level and fighting with a monkey, Teddy Roosevelt's like, who's evolved? Who's evolved? And Ben Stiller's like, I'm evolved. And they're like, okay, they're both evolved. So that was the main thing. The other historical inaccuracy that I would caught on to, but again, I don't know everything, is that Genghis Khan was not just some, lunatic madman who would just go crazy. He was a really skilled warrior and leader, and they just had him acting like a berserker, like that Viking way of doing the warfare, just going crazy, charging on someone. Whereas Genghis Khan would have, planned better and been more efficient with it. And
Genghis Khan isn't the same person as Attila the Hun. So they're two different people, but they're from the same background.
No, they're the same person. Okay, wait. Josh, you have to delete that then.
But I mean, all of that still applies. I mean, he was, a ruler and a very competent ruler at that.
Yeah, I don't know why I got the two mixed up. But yes, he was a strategic warrior.
That's the problem with this movie, is that it covers so many periods of history that I can't know what's wrong in all of them.
Yeah, but yes. So I just looked up Attila the Hun, and yes, you're right. I got them mixed up. But he too was a very good leader and commanded armies, and he wouldn't have acted like that. He would have, if he wanted you dead, it would have been strategic and quick. And then there's so much hostility between everybody, and then I don't know. That's what I never got. But these movies, I find they stress me out so much. I just get so they just get my anxiety up, especially when at the end when they they have to get everybody back into the museum, or else they turn to dust, and they have to get everything back and cleaned up. But the sun is already coming up. They have minutes, but they're moving so slow and talking and making jokes, and you're just like, everybody needs to get back in. It's so stressful.
Here's one I can always count on. If there's a capuchin in a movie, they're going to say it's from Africa and not from South or Central America, which is where it's actually from. They have the capuchin monkey in the Hall of African Mammals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
Not to mention an ostrich and a snake in the Hall of African Mammals, but I guess that could just be scenery.
Yes. Also, I didn't know why the lions were going to eat Ben Stiller, but the lions wouldn't have eaten everybody else. Maybe because Ben Stiller's the only one made of meat?
Well,
True.
does a taxidermied lion need to eat meat, or does it need to eat taxidermied matter to replenish its own taxidermied matter?
I mean, how many Night Watchmen did they go through before they made the realization that you need to lock up the lions?
And even then, it was never first on his list. I'm sorry, but lock up the lions would be first on your list.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
And then what I didn't get is why... So, Teddy Roosevelt is Teddy Roosevelt with all his memories and stories. Sacagawea is Sacagawea with all his memories and stories. But T-Rex is a dog?
I mean, that's just what they were like in real life. You know, apex
That
carnivores.
would be so cute.
Let's talk about the bad guys' plot here, because they're real people. They're not governed by magic, apart from, I guess, the magic keeping them youthful. But they hire this guy, and on his third night, they decide to rob the place. Mm-hmm. After it has been well established in his mind that the museum comes to life. If they had just removed that tablet of Akhman-Ra the first night before sunset, he would have thought it was a regular job and he'd have no idea.
Yeah.
And they would have got away with it so easily. So they were just,
wow.
I mean, clearly creating this plot just to drive the movie. It's specifically for the viewer, but not to be actually successful in robbing this museum.
Well,
but,
they also
they could have done it at any
filled
point
his apartment. Sorry, they filled his apartment with stolen goods, too, so I think they were trying to make it look like he stole the tablet.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
Yeah, they were trying to do that, but they could have done that on the first night, right?
Yes, they could have.
Yeah. I mean, also, they could have done it at any point during their entire careers if they just, like, replaced it with a replica, and then no one would have been any the wiser.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They really put things off to the last minute, because on the, I think it was on the second or third night, Bill Cobb's character sneakily takes the key from Ben Stiller to take an impression of it. He could have done that anytime in the preceding years. He didn't have to wait until the last minute and take the key back from Ben Stiller to take the impression of it. He should have just taken the key to the hardware store and got a cut of it directly, right?
Absolutely. Well, what about the Neanderthals? I mean, they were pretty rubbish, I thought.
Yeah, they're pretty bad.
They don't have language, they don't have fire.
Yeah, they just made them look stupid again, right? Like, they were kind of the throwaway characters, the one that could die without, like, destroying the plot and all that stuff.
Yeah, very stereotypical. They didn't walk upright, they always hunched over.
Mm-hmm.
The weapons they're carrying look absurd. One of them is carrying sort of a bone, double-pointed, like, fishing spear, which Neanderthals didn't really use bone tools, so, and I think we're learning that they probably did fish, but I don't think we've seen any evidence of a tool that looks anything like that.
Yeah.
I was hoping we'd have a lot to say about the Neanderthals, but there's just not really that much about it. When they escaped on the third night there, and the news was reporting, they were talking about cave paintings in the subway, but Neanderthals didn't really do cave paintings that we know of.
Yeah.
So apparently those are real cave paintings that are in the subway stop for the museum.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Neanderthals, they were always just jumping around and too excited and busy. Like, I couldn't really pay much attention to them. There was too much happening.
Yeah.
With the PhD student working on her dissertation, then she gets to meet Sacagawea, the topic of her dissertation. She's so excited because she had said she was going to have to stop her dissertation because she ran out of research, right? Which isn't really how that works. It just means that you're done. But now she can finish it because now she can meet her and talk to her. So that's assuming, again, that she has all of her memories. But then you wouldn't ever be able to publish that because how are you going to reference it? Like, you can't just make shit up and put it in your PhD. You'd be like, well, she told me.
That does remind me of that, you might have seen it, like a viral image of a paper where it's got a footnote. And you don't see what it's referring to, but the footnote is, this was revealed to me in a dream.
In a dream, yes.
I have that image saved on my phone. I was going through my photos the other day and I saw that. I'm like, what's this from?
Yeah.
So yeah, this was revealed to me by a wax dummy, a magical wax dummy. But I mean, it's maybe quite clear from how much I've tried to excuse this film, but I just really liked it. I found it like just funny and kind of heartwarming and quite cute. And it's got tons of great lines in it.
Yeah.
Like I went to Cambridge is a great line coming from a mummy. And there's some that I made a note of. So what was it? What Teddy Roosevelt says to Larry when he's getting hit by Dexter. He's like, "Good Lord, Larry, why are you slapping a monkey?" I mean, that's just fantastic writing right there. And I really like the character of Jedediah, this kind of manic Wild West cowboy, and his interaction with Octavius, the kind of stoic Roman legionary, and how they kind of go from being mortal enemies to band of brothers style comrades in arms. And there's a really nice scene when they're kind of in trouble. And Jedediah says to Octavius, "I ain't quitting you." Like a nice kind of throwback to Brokeback Mountain, which is funny.
Yeah.
Also, just generally, Owen Wilson's character was very sort of emotional and like deeply honest in a way I kind of wasn't expecting for a movie that's 15 or 20 years old.
Yeah.
Just very insecure about being so small, but whenever Ben Stiller confronts him on it, he just sort of admits that, he's like, that makes me feel bad.
Yeah, it hurts my feelings.
And having to admit that he's firing blanks from his replica guns as well. It's quite funny. The casting's incredible. I think Robin Williams as Teddy Roosevelt is really good. He's got some nice lines as well. At the end when he gets kind of chopped in half by Dick Van Dyke's escaping money train, and Sacagawea sort of waxes him back together, and he says to Larry, "I'm made of wax, Larry. What are you made of?" That's also a great line.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't notice this one until I read it on IMDb, but there's a couple of times when Larry, right at the beginning, he's trying to escape the Huns and he backs up into the elevator and it closes behind him. The posters on the walls of the elevator are sort of relevant to the scene. Like in that one, when he's running away, there's a poster for something called Spineless.
Yeah, I saw that.
And then in the later scene, I don't remember what it was, but it was like sort of like in a redemption sort of scene. It said something, I don't know what it said, redemption or something similar to that. So there was some little attention to detail like that was kind of nice.
That's cool. I saw the spineless thing, but I just thought, I wonder what that is. So if you guys could spend a night with a sentient wax figure of somebody from history that has that person's memories and personality, who would it be?
That's a tricky question.
I know.
I don't know. There's the kind of there's the dude bro answer, and there's the more thoughtful kind of evolved person answer, I guess.
Okay, let's do evolved and then your dude bro answer.
Okay. It would probably have to be Darwin. I think
that was obvious. I would say Darwin too, but then that might be pretty boring.
It might be, yeah. He's not a big chatter, and it's like puking every 5 minutes. Yeah. In that case, then maybe as a backup, if that was too boring.
But you'd have to say you chose Darwin. Like you'd have to do it just to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. Right, give me a minute. You can cut this awkward pause out.
What about you, Josh?
Well, I didn't know who I would say until you said Darwin, and now I'm going to be a hipster and say Wallace.
Oh, yeah.
I think Wallace's story is so much more interesting than Darwin's.
Yeah.
Basically did everything Darwin did, but he started off more poor and had a lot more adversity on his way. I don't know if everybody listening knows Wallace. I love to tell the story of Wallace, but he did the same thing Darwin did, but like 15 or 20 years later. Darwin was a rich kid, so he just got on a boat and traveled the world. Wallace grew up poor, not really poor, but like his father was like kind of always moving from one get-rich-quick scheme to another and kept losing all the family's money. And he came up with some scheme with a friend of his, Henry Walter Bates, to go to the Amazon and collect specimens to send back to England for science to study. He was in the Amazon for like 4 years, and on the way back, his all of his stuff, he found it was hung up in customs, so he got it cleared through customs, got it all on a ship. The ship burnt and sunk in the Atlantic Ocean. He lost everything. Vowed never to go out on the ocean again, and then within a few months was on his way to Malaysia, where he spent another few years. One day he's there in bed with malaria, so he can't go out and look for specimens, but he can, of course, keep writing even though he's delirious with malaria. Basically writes up in like 7 pages the whole book that Darwin's been working on for 20 years. But because he wasn't a rich guy, he wasn't into connected. Like high society. Yeah, he wasn't connected. He's like, I can't submit this. I'm too small fish. So he decided to send it to somebody for review, sent it directly to Darwin, without knowing Darwin had been working on this exact problem. Well, he knew he was working on something similar, but he didn't know he touched on exactly the same thing. We're talking about natural selection here. They both touch upon the same thing. Darwin receives this letter. He's like, I can't publish my book. He's going to think I stole it. He almost threw out his entire book, handed it over to Lyell and who was it? Hooker, maybe? I can't remember. Lyell for sure, I think, was one of the guys. He's like, take this off my hands. They're like, oh, we'll take care of this for you. They presented Darwin's abstract and Wallace's paper at a meeting of the Linnaean Society. Neither Wallace or Darwin were there because Darwin's daughter had just died, I think. And Wallace was in Malaysia because it took like 6 months to get a letter around Africa by boat. So he had to send the letter there and then receive word back. So they published it before he'd even heard that they were doing it. And throughout the 1800s, it was known as the Darwin-Wallace theory. And it wasn't until, I guess, the new synthesis where they dropped Wallace from the name and it just became the Darwin theory of evolution. So I think Wallace's story is so much more interesting. Plus, I've read a lot of Wallace's autobiography and stuff. Just seems like he would be much more interesting to talk to than Darwin. Also kind of went a little crazy later in life with like spiritualism and anti-vax stuff during that first wave of anti-vax. So I guess I would talk to him.
Yeah, that's a good choice. That is a good choice.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking, Kim, who would you go for?
Cleopatra the Seventh.
Okay. That's a pretty cool answer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe I would go for Marcus Aurelius. I think he seems like he'd be pretty cool to hang out with.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we just assume that they speak English, right?
Yeah, because of the magic of Akmenraz tablet.
So this movie it's called the Natural History Museum, but the exterior shots are the American Natural History Museum, which I think is a small distinction. The interior is shot on a soundstage in Vancouver, so it's not the actual museum, but the exhibits are roughly based on the museum. Have either of you been to this museum? Ross, you thought it was the Smithsonian, so I assume not.
I have, but mostly the back. But I think I went through the front, and I don't think... Like, I think the foyer looks similar, but I don't think the exhibits, like, I didn't recognize any of the exhibits as something that I'd seen before. But I don't know, you go to so many, like, how many natural history museums around the world do you go to? It's, like, hard to keep. But also, natural history museums don't tend to have
historical
dioramas. Stuff. Yeah, like, it's usually about the Earth and about life forms, not about, wouldn't have Teddy Roosevelt and all that stuff, so...
Well, I haven't been there, but I've gone on a few, like, video tours. They have, like, video tours on YouTube. Some museums have, like, there were a lot of museums doing virtual tours at the beginning of the pandemic, but I couldn't find a good one for this one, like a sort of a 3D, like, navigate at your own pace sort of thing. But my understanding is that this museum, the real American Natural History Museum, was sort of dedicated to Teddy Roosevelt, and the entryway is like the Teddy Roosevelt Rotunda or something, which also does have dinosaur skeletons as the centerpiece. Although it's not a Tyrannosaurus, I think it's an Allosaurus and a Barosaurus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So Allosaurus is a theropod similar to Tyrannosaurus, roughly similar, and Barosaurus is one of the long neck sauropods.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it has a figure of Teddy Roosevelt, but it is named after Teddy Roosevelt.
I remember, I went to see the Titanosaurus was at the American Museum of Natural History. That was pretty cool. And I'm now remembering the reason why I don't remember it that well is because me and my sister were there and we were very hungover. It's coming back to me.
That's a good reason.
Yeah. It's a beautiful building, though, just off of Stanley Park. Not Stanley Park. Stanley Park's in Vancouver. The Stanley Park in New York. Central Park.
Okay, yeah, because that's what it looked like Dick Van Dyke and Ben Stiller were racing through on their chase, like that famous bridge that goes over the pond in Central Park.
Yeah, it was a really nice place to work, actually, because it's a beautiful building, and then when you take your break, you can just go sit in the park, have lunch, and then go back in. The most accurate thing about this movie is that the museum was underfunded and letting good employees go.
Yeah, that was very true.
So, kind of related to that, one of the things we can get into about this movie is that apparently, when the movie came out, it came out in the holiday season, I guess, in 2006. Museum attendance in the following weeks spiked by about 20%. They got about 20% more attendance. At least for a few weeks. I don't know how long that effect was.
Great.
But people were coming to the museum expecting to find all the things that were in the movie. And of course, a lot of them are not there. None of the historical dioramas, there's like Civil War mannequins in this movie. And I'm like, why is there a Civil War mannequins in a natural history museum? But people would come to the museum and they were expecting to see these things, and then when they get there, it's different. And it seems like the museum took a really positive approach to that, which is they said, oh yeah, the movie's fictional, we don't have all these things, but we have so much cool stuff, and they just trusted that when people got there, they would still be impressed by all the cool stuff that they did have. And so they tried to swing that as a positive. I mean, it is positive to get more attendance when you're a museum and you're perpetually underfunded. So I think this is one of the things where we sometimes talk about the effects that movies can have, and this is one where we have sort of a measurable effect. So even though the movie is not accurate in a lot of ways that we've pointed out, even if a movie is not accurate, it can still have a positive effect for museums or for archaeology or paleontology.
Although I have never been to a natural history museum when it was open that wasn't jam-packed. So
that's true. Yeah, I was in the Natural History Museum in London just a couple of weeks ago, and you could hardly move. It was like absolutely like rock solid. But it's interesting. I think I think it's different in Canada and the States, but definitely in the UK, all museums are free. So I mean, they're one of the very few places, apart from libraries, I would say, where you can go and you can just exist there. You can just wander around. No one's forcing you to pay any money, buy any tickets. Get your wallet out to pay for stuff. You can just purely kind of exist in those spaces, which is a kind of rarer and rarer commodity these days. And so that's also got to have a big effect on how popular they are.
Yeah,
it's definitely different because I was just at the Manitoba Museum in Winnipeg yesterday, and we paid $50 for two of us to see. Well, that's for the main galleries, plus there was a special dinosaur exhibit, so it was.
It shouldn't cost that much, though. Like, you're pricing people out of it. That's
yeah, and that's fully against the ethos of museums. It's they're for the education of everyone.
Oh, plus $10 for parking.
Yeah, I mean that's something I think we have to be thankful for in the UK, that museums are free and that people can use them. Fingers crossed, current government notwithstanding, that should continue.
Yeah.
Although they do have free admission for Indigenous people to the museums in Winnipeg, so at least that's a positive.
So they can see the stuff that they've taken from them. All right.
Yeah.
Which we have to talk about with this film. One of the main characters in the film is a moai, Easter Island statue, which has been uprooted from Easter Island. And I was looking into this a bit before talking today, and I know the British Museum has one or two, and there's a couple of American museums have them, a couple in Chile as well. But this is hugely controversial, the idea that these things were carted off mostly in the 19th century The kind of people turn up to, yeah, we'll have one of those, and just take it back. And I think there's like many artifacts that the kind of descendants of the people that they were appropriated from, to put it politely, are within their rights to be asking for it back. And I think the people of Rapa Nui, of Easter Island, which is I think now is a territory of Chile, are kind of strongly pushing for some of these to be put back, because they have no meaning in a museum particularly. They're not in any danger of going anywhere on Easter Island, and their context is where they were put up on Easter Island. Plus, they could have make him a comic relief character by saying "dum dum" all the time and wanting gum gum.
We can talk about the Egyptian mummy as well. Egypt is, very famously trying to get back all of the Egyptian artifacts and things that were taken during the 20th century. So that's not something that gets brought up in this movie at all. But why should they have who seems to be a pretty important Egyptian mummy on display in New York, right?
Yeah. I think he's meant to be based on Tutankhamun, who, the most famous Egyptian pharaoh, who, wasn't all that spectacular as a ruler, died young. But Tutankhamun's been in the news this past week or so. I don't know if you guys saw this story, but there's long been kind of suggestions that Howard Carter, who was the excavator of Tutankhamun's tomb, actually kind of stole some stuff from his own excavation and kind of gave it to people. And they found evidence from letters written between Carter and some of his associates that he gave away jewelry that had come from Tutankhamun's tomb to his friend.
Oh my goodness!
So yeah, that's a lot of the arguments about, yes, well, we have to appropriate this stuff from the country it came from to look after it better than the people whose country it is. And then you read about the fact that they were nicking stuff out of it and giving it to their pals. Doesn't really hold up.
Yeah, the person who's supposed to be protecting it. Ugh. I mean, having something like that, I guess, you're like, okay, I have this jewel from King Tut's tomb, and it's really cool. You show a few people, but you can't really do much more than that, because one, no one's going to believe you, and two, you're not supposed to have it, right?
Yeah, it's stolen. And then if you give it to, he's given it to one of his aristocratic pals, then, that's the context is gone. Now it's just a trinket. It's just a bit of jewelry. And if you can't tell anyone where it's come from, it's just, it's completely divorced from its context.
Yeah. But I bet you there's people that have, like, secret rooms just full of amazing things.
I'm sure. Yeah.
All right, so here's something that I was thinking about during this movie that's not related to history or archaeology or anything like that, but just sort of, I feel like there's this weird dystopian capitalist American work ethic sentiment throughout this movie that I don't think I noticed when I watched it before, but maybe it's because of, our dystopian capitalist hellscape of the past few years pulling it out. But they're really trying to show that Ben Stiller is a failure, and it's not because he's not financially stable, which he may or may not be, but they never make it clear. It's just that he doesn't have a job. And so it's very important that he has a job. Even as kid, like, I've never heard of a kid that's like, Dad, you need to have a job, right? Like, why would a kid care? And the mother is like, you can't keep moving because that's not stable for a kid. But, like, the kid lives with her. So, like, does it really matter if he goes to visit his dad at a different apartment every few years? Like, I was thinking, my sister is married to a police officer, so they move around a lot. Her oldest kid has probably lived in 5 or 6 different houses in his, like, 8 or 10 years. And I don't think that's a problem for him. Like, it seems okay. But Ben Stiller, like, he has to move to a different apartment. But he doesn't really seem to be that bad off. Like, it's not like he can afford to buy an RC car to chase around a Tyrannosaurus at work. He can afford to buy a magic kit to impress Attila the Hun. It's never clear that he's actually in a bad place.
Mm.
It's just that he's a moral failure for not having a stable job. He also invented the snapper, which, I mean, I did a little bit of math here. The clapper debuted in 1984, and Ben Stiller was born in 1965. So if it's true that he invented the snapper at a point in time that would actually compete with the clapper and didn't just copy it, because he seems to imply that it was an unfortunate coincidence, he would have invented this thing when he was 19. They don't go into any of the details of this, but how do you invent this machine? I don't know how to do that. So they're suggesting that he's a failure just because he is interesting. He does a lot of different things. He's got a diverse life, but he moves a little bit and doesn't hold down a stable job, which that just describes me. I've never lived in the same place for more than 2 years.
Yeah, too.
I don't have a stable job. I'm almost 40 and I'm still a student.
Yeah. No. It's also that, like, he might lose his apartment, and oh my god, that's so, like, he's such a loser for that. But you're like, he might lose his giant apartment in Manhattan and have to move to Queens. Like, that's not a loser. That's like, he has to be well off to even afford that apartment, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's a good point. That does kind of, runs through the whole film. He's got a good relationship with his kid. He's got a good relationship with his ex-wife. Mm-hmm. He's even got a good relationship with his ex-wife's partner for the most part. Mm-hmm. He's solvent enough that he's able to run a car and do fun things with his kid. You're right. It's set up as like a moral failing that he's not, working his ass off 9 to 5. No, sorry, 9 to 5 would be a piss easy job according to kind of American standards. You want him to be working like 7 till 7.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that's just baked in. I mean, I'm sure the writers didn't even notice it. It's just, that's the way it is. And, hailing from more or less godless commie countries as we all are, that kind of attitude of, living to work rather than working to live is a bit alien. And I can say that as somebody who's been pretty much unemployed for the past 8 years and has had no secure positions in that time. But it's interesting how people respond to it as well. Certainly, you do feel, I think, a bit of judgment from people if you're kind of discussing what you do, depending on how you answer. So but it can be a tool. So over the past few years, if I'm unsure of a person I'm meeting them, they ask me what I do for the first time, I tend to say that I'm a house husband, and it's quite interesting or a stay-at-home dad, and it's quite interesting the response that can get. There's been many times that's just been the end of the conversation, but other times not, and it's a useful tool for kind of weeding out who I'd actually want to speak to and who I wouldn't.
And if you had a full-time job, like if you were, working 7 to 7, 9 to 5, whatever, you might have not written your book. That's amazingly popular.
Yeah, right? True.
And influential.
Yeah. But I think that's something in US society that kind of equates very, very strongly work and money with worth.
Oh yeah, always got to be hustling, right? Yeah. All your hobbies should make you money, and
but even to the extent that if you're working full time in something that doesn't pay a lot, but it has other moral benefits, like say you're a
teacher,
a full time carer, or you're working in some kind of working class job, street cleaning or whatever, things that are essential and super worthwhile and pay the bills, then even that gets looked down upon because it's not the right kind of work for some people.
Yeah. I've been told, I think it was during my first or second postdoc, I was told by a friend that I should stop playing this archaeology game and get a real job.
Oh my god. Is this an ex-friend?
We're not as close anymore.
Oh yeah, understandably. I remember sitting around dinner table with my wife's grandparents when they were still alive, and my wife's grandfather asked, "So, what is the point of what you do?"
Yes.
which which is a very difficult question
It
to
is
answer
hard, yeah.
as a PhD student. Yeah.
I think one time when I was doing my master's, my uncle suggested maybe I should get a job in the oil field.
No. Oh. I mean, if you like that, you like that, but that's such a hard job. I always say when people ask me that, because it can be hard, they're like, well, I just spent 2 years writing a paper that 3 people are going to read, and one of them might like it. I just say that I'm adding to humanity's knowledge one bit at a time.
That's right. I mean, that's the approach you have to take, is that, knowledge is its own good, and you never know what's going to come from it. Like the study of things like electricity by people like Galvani and Volta, when that was originally being done, that was just, oh, this is weird. This is a natural force that we've no understanding of. Let's just investigate it. Let's get some frog's legs and some electrodes and see what happens, and have some fun with it. It was only after the fact that they were able to turn it into a power source. So
yeah, even the guy that made the first microscope and discovered microorganisms, he was just playing around. Nobody paid him any attention. They had no idea why he'd want to, like, what he was doing to make a fun glass microscope. Right?
Is that Lowenhoek, Anton von Lowenhoek? He had some crazy times. I mean, apart from...
Because he had to write a letter to the Royal Society being like, there's tiny monsters in the water. You can see them with my machine. Nobody would come to look.
He went above and beyond. Like, there's this fantastic... I remember reading the kind of original abstract of it. Fantastic description of how he identified sperm for the first time. And how he had Congress with his wife, but it was okay because they were married, and their intention was to have kids. And then he quickly collected some and looked at it under the microscope, and that's how we know that's the sort of start of reproductive science. It's an incredible paper that needs to be read.
Yeah. But what would his father-in-law said to him at the dinner table, right?
Wow.
Why are you doing that?
So, what are our final thoughts about Night at the Museum?
Well, given that we've explained away all the plot holes that Josh thought he'd found, I really love this film. I think it's just really fun.
It stresses me out in the way that a lot of Ben Stiller movies do. It just gets my anxiety. But it's one of those movies that's if it's on TV, I'll always just watch it.
Yeah. It reels you in, and you just kind of end up kind of getting pulled along for the ride. And yeah, Ben Stiller is quite anxiety inducing, but he's kind of mellowed. Well, he's diluted by the presence of all these other great actors like Owen Wilson and Steve Coogan and Dick Van Dyke, and not Ricky Gervais. He makes it worse.
Oh no, I hate him.
Yeah,
I like Ben Stiller, but it's those movies like that he's in, like Meet the Fockers and stuff, where everything goes wrong. Whereas if you just said one sentence out loud, none of this would happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the cast does a lot of work in this one. There's a really good cast. It's funny. It's entertaining to watch. It's not like a slog to get through like a lot of the ones that we watch. But I think I like it a little less. I think that I need more consistency in my world building, I think.
Yeah. Fair enough. But I would put this up there. I mean, it's definitely, I think, in the sort of top 5 or 10 of the films that we've watched. It's approaching the top of Mount Encino Man in our kind of topographical landscape of film goodness.
It's interesting that we have like a measurable effect of this movie where we don't really have that for other movies, because it's based at a real museum, and then we can see the actual attendance at the museum increasing, which I think we can consider as probably a good thing, even if people were going to see things that weren't at the museum. So I guess it's not different from other movies in that sense, because probably every movie gets people interested in the topics that they're presenting. But I like that aspect of the movie. Even if I can criticize the movie, it seems like it did have a positive effect, so that's a good thing.
I wonder if we could measure increase in outdoor swimming pool creation after the release of Encino Man.
I wonder.
There's
a fact that's floating around. There's a fact that's floating around the internet, which I have had trouble finding the direct source of, but there's a suggestion that after the first Indiana Jones, applications to archaeology departments at universities increased significantly.
Yeah, I can see that.
I've heard that. I've also heard it for the Scully effect. That I think it was applications from women to science subjects increased after the X-Files came on air, considerably.
And then I think forensic anthropology probably also with bones and CSI and stuff too.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's nice to know that even though we're just talking about silly and sometimes bad movies, there is a real important societal influence that they have. So we're not just wasting our time talking about them. If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.
Yeah, we're really good at podcasting, really bad at advertising.
That's classic academics.